Morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, wherever you're joining from. It is a great pleasure to warmly welcome you to this sixth online engagement session of the Transboundary Freshwater Security Governance Train. My name is Yumiko Yasuda. I'm the Senior Transboundary Water Corporation Specialist at the Global Water Partnership and the lead faculty of the Massive Open online course on governance for Transboundary Freshwater Security, which was developed by GWP, GFIWLM, along with many global partners and experts from the field of transboundary water. Since the opening of this course in August 2020, the Mooc has attracted over 2,200 participants from over 150 countries around the world, confirming the need and interest for learning about this subject. The course is available for anyone to take at their own pace. In order to enhance the learning experience and to provide opportunities for people to engage and interact with experts in the field, GWP and the Wuhan International Water Law Academy worked together to create an online event series called Transboundary Freshwater Security Governance Train. In this series of events, we'll be highlighting not only the key topics of transboundary freshwater governance, but also to highlight various examples and expertise from different geographic locations around the globe, as if the train is stopping at various locations of the world. Together with the Wuhan International Water Law Academy, we had planned for 6 online sessions specifically focusing on topics of international water law. Today is the last session of this current International Water Law series, and the topic is on international water law and transboundary groundwater. Today's session has 2 main parts. The first part is a panel discussion by distinguished speakers, where they will be sharing their experiences on the topic and answering your questions. The second part is a breakout session where you will all have opportunities to interact with experts. We have a great lineup of session chairs and speakers for the next 1.5 hours. And today, our Transboundary Freshwater Governance Train will be stopping at Africa, Europe, and Latin America, welcoming speakers from all of these regions. I would like to inform you of some housekeeping rules for this session. This online session will be recorded, so people who couldn't join due to the other commitments or the different time zones will be able to also view the discussions later on. Please always mute your audio when the moderator or speakers are presenting. You can unmute your audio or will be invited to unmute your audio by the moderator or the chair when requested to speak or during the breakout session. The event will not only present the new knowledge, but will welcome your input in the interactive part. So please, we count on your presence throughout the whole session. Today's session is designed to be as interactive as possible for you to be able to ask questions to experts and also to provide your thoughts and feedback to the subject. We'll be using the poll as the main interactive tool, particularly during the first session. Some of you have already used a poll while you're waiting for the event to start. So let's see the first poll questions here. Where are you joining from? We would like to hear where you're joining from. So please, with your phone or your computer browser, please go to pollleaf.com/GWP. And then you will see a map of the globe where you will be able to pin your locations. So many of you, I can see many of you are pinning your locations. A lot of pins coming from Europe, Africa. I also see a lot of pins coming from Latin America, South America, also some from North America. That's really great. Yes, some colleagues I see coming some new pin in Asia, India. You can see there in Nepal. Great to see also in the Middle East. Thank you so much. Really great to see the locations. Now we've got 75 participants to the session, and I think that number just keeps increasing. So yes, thank you so much for pinning all the locations where you're coming from. So we have a next question. This is a bit of a questions to test your knowledge. How many transboundary aquifers are there around the world? More than 1,000? More than 500? More than 100 or less than 100? Let's see. A lot of people answering. More than 1,500. Yes, please keep typing in your answers. I think you will find a lot about it during the session. So the correct answer here is where the majority of the people have answered, more than 500. With 592 identified transboundary aquifer, although numbers are changing as there will be some new measurements and discoveries of the aquifers, the groundwater. It's particularly difficult to really understand because it's a bit invisible from the surface. So thank you very much for answering that question. Next question. Should the transboundary groundwater be managed in the same way as transboundary surface waters? Yes or no? Are they the same principles that you should apply, or are they different principles that you should apply? Thank you for answering. A lot of you actually saying no, it should be different. But still 30% of you are saying yes, it should be managed in the same way. So this is a very interesting question. I'm sure during the session, you'll get some inspirations on which approaches that you could be sufficient, and perhaps it may differ from the region to region or the transboundary water bodies to water body. So thank you very much for answering that question. Then we will come to the final question. The final question is an open question. Please type or vote any questions you would like to ask the panel. So when you actually register to the session, you have sent in your questions. So we are already taking those questions into considerations, but I'm sure you have lots of other questions that you would like to ask the panel. And we will keep this poll open throughout the panel discussion. So you can just type in the question or vote for the question that you also agree that is important. So please feel free to type or vote while you're listening to the panel discussion. You already have one question that is supported by already 6 people. What is the role of international water law in transboundary cooperation? That's a very broad question, and that's very much of the topic of our series of events. Thank you. Yes, that's the second question. Very good. Why is the most shared water agreements are more focused on surface water than groundwater? How does the governance principle of equitable reasonable utilization apply to groundwater? So these are really great questions. I hope that you will get some answers during the sessions and also in the interactive sessions. So yes, thank you very much. We will change the screen, but you can still type in your vote questions on your browsers, on your phones and computers. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's 2 event chairs, Professor Otto Spijkers and Dr. David Duvlovny. Next slide, please. So Professor Otto Spijkers, he's a founding staff member of the International Water Law Academy and also the professor at the China Institute of Boundary and Ocean Studies at the Research Institute of Environmental Law of the Wuhan University. Otto has studied international law at the University of Amsterdam and so on. And he prior to joining this institute in Wuhan, he was a lecturer at Public International Water Law at Utrecht University and researcher at Utrecht Center for Law, Ocean and Sustainability Law. And he has a number of experiences here that you can see, that you can read on the screen, and also you can see this on the website. But the most important part here is a fun fact. Otto has recently got the Chinese name, and I hope I'm pronouncing correctly now, is Gao Hai Fing. His name is inspired by his height. Otto is very tall, and the fact that he is born near the ocean. So the first character, Chinese character, means high, and then the second one means the ocean. His biggest achievement in life is finding a home in lots of different countries. And you may wish to ask him, if you're in the discussion group with him, how many countries that he has found his home. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. David Duvlovny. He's a lecturer at School of Law at Chongqing University. Dr. Duvlovny is an emerging young scholar at the Law International Water courses. He conducts teaching and research on international environmental law with a focus on law and international water courses. And particularly, he's very much into the reciprocity in China's transboundary waters. So the important fun fact is that David is a bit of an adventurous eater, willing to try anything from sandworms to cicada, at least once. So that's really great. And I'm sure there's lots of things to try, particularly in China, in terms of ingredients to eat. His biggest achievement in life is after moving to China in 2014, he now speaks Mandarin, although it's a work in progress. And he has nicely corrected my pronunciation of Otto's name in Chinese just a little while ago. So thank you so much for that, Dave. So without further ado, I would now like to hand over to Otto and Dave to chair this next session. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to this session on international water law and groundwater. Thank you, Yumiko, for your great introduction. My name is David. I'm coming to you from the hot and humid Chongqing, where we're here at 35 degrees. It is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's topic of transboundary groundwaters. So as we talked about in the question, there are approximately 600 transboundary groundwaters, 366, including 366 transboundary aquifers and around 226 groundwater bodies. Now, while these are under the surface, and they're often connected to the transboundary surface waters that we've talked about in previous sessions. And now, while they're all over the world, as you can see on the map, and being utilized by different states for various different development purposes as a fundamental source of water resources. Next slide, please. Now, international groundwater law has developed a bit more slowly than international surface water law, with some even referring to it as its poor cousin. While international law relating to transboundary groundwaters is made up of many different layers at the global, regional, multilateral, and even bilateral level, from the 2 global water conventions to the 2008 draft articles on transboundary aquifers and various regional, multilateral, and bilateral agreements. Now, while there are agreements that exist, gaps remain, as some of these conventions apply to groundwaters differently. So for example, the 2 global water conventions have different scopes and therefore have different applications to groundwater. And I'm sure that our expert panelists tonight will tell us more about these issues. In 2008, the draft articles were commended to states as guidance for bilateral agreements and arrangements. However, discussion on whether or not they should be continued whether or not they should be transferred into a binding agreement is an ongoing discussion at the state-to-state level. Now, we're going to hear more about these issues. I'm going to hand it over to Professor Otto Speckers, who will introduce our expert panelists this evening.
Thank you very much, David. So it's a great pleasure to speak to all of you. I'm actually in a hotel room now in Xi'an. So I'm a professor at Wuhan, but I now moved to Xi'an. It's a city famous for its terracotta warriors. And actually the terracotta warriors and the transboundary aquifers have quite a lot in common. So there are a lot of them. I actually saw them today. There are a lot of warriors. There may be more warriors than transboundary aquifers in this world. And also, we are still uncovering new terracotta warriors as we are still uncovering new transboundary aquifers all over the world. So let me now introduce the 3 speakers. I will just introduce all 3 of them and then give the floor to the first one. The first one is Dr. Francesco Sindico. He is a director of the Strathclyde Centre for Environmental Law and Governance in Scotland, in the United Kingdom. Please don't mention soccer to him. That would be very much appreciated. He recently published a book, and he will definitely say more about this because the book is exactly on the same topic as tonight's webinar. But he also specializes in climate change litigation. And the fun fact is he enjoys ending big conference with a Salit. And I actually did some Googling and I found out that this has a lot to do with music and dancing and also storytelling. And this is, of course, something Francesco will already do for us tonight. And his biggest achievement in life is that he actually speaks more than just English, and that he is trying to convince us that English is not the only language in the world. And being in China, I often wonder if that may be an implicit reference to Chinese. And then the next speaker, so also next slide, please, is a Professor Pilar Carolina Villar. She's a professor at the Sea Institute of the Federal University of Sao Paulo, so that's in Brazil. And her career has focused on the multiple dimensions of water governance, especially in the Garana Aquifer and the La Plata Basin. So both of these transboundary watercourses are shared by Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And La Plata is also shared by Bolivia, next to all these countries. Her fun fact I found very interesting. So she has been repeatedly stopped at the airport for smuggling Guarani Aquifer rock. And I'm really curious what these customs officers then thought it was actually. What substance does it look like? What illegal substance? The biggest achievement in her life is to value and celebrate small achievements in everyday life. That's what we all should do, I think. And she will talk about the legal and institutional aspects of the Guarani Aquifer. So she will focus on that particular aquifer, whilst Francesco will introduce us to the global frameworks, the two conventions and the ILC articles. And then our final speaker is James Sarumba. He's the executive director of the SADC, the Southern African Development Community Groundwater Management Institute. And his fun fact, I think, is that knowledge is the only resource that increases with sharing. And I actually tried to think of other resources that increase with sharing. And I came up with peace, love, and understanding. And there might be others too. His biggest achievement in life is setting up the SADC Groundwater Management Institute in 2016. He's still running that. And also the Center of Excellence for Groundwater Development and Governance in the SADC region. And he will, of course, talk about the role of the Southern African Development Community in transboundary groundwater governance in that region. So I now give the floor to the first speaker, Francesco, immediately followed by Pilar, and then James will speak last, and after that, there will be lots of opportunity first for me to ask questions and then for the audience. So I now give the floor to Francesco. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Otto. I'm starting the counter now. So first of all, thank you so much to all the organizers, to GWP, to the organizer of the Mooc. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today. I only have 5 minutes, so I will go immediately into my presentation. The three things I will try to do very briefly is give you a bit of a picture of the very complex maze that is international law applicable to transboundary aquifers. I will try to answer together whether some of these rules provisions that we may find in this maze are legally binding. And I'll try to distill, although it's very complicated, why should we even be talking about customary international law in this field. And I will finish with just some examples of aquifers and agreements/arrangements related to those specific aquifers. But do allow me, the organizers already mentioned, and I'm very grateful for that, that I have recently published a book. I just put in the chat the link on international law and transboundary aquifers, where obviously I expand on all of these points. And for those of you who are fluent in Spanish, there's a podcast, quite a long one actually, where I also discuss all of these issues. Next slide, please. So we are in front of a puzzle. And as a lot of you have maybe done puzzles, apparently in the pandemic, even more and more people have done puzzles, it can get very frustrating. There are a lot of pieces, it takes a lot of time. Well, that's what international law applicable to transboundary aquifers is. If somebody asked, is there a place to go? Is there one stop where everything will be ready there for me? Probably the answer is no. You need to look at least 3 key instruments: the Watercourses Convention, the UN Watercourses Convention, the United Nations International Law Commission draft articles on the law of transboundary aquifers, and then increasingly so because of its global reach, the UNECE Water Convention and its model provisions on transboundary groundwater. Now, I don't have a slide about what all of these say, but let me just very briefly share with you that it is, again, a complex architecture of substantial provisions, institutional related provisions, and procedural provisions. When it comes to substantial provisions, what I can highlight here very briefly is that all countries have a right to utilize their transboundary aquifer, although in an equitable and reasonable manner, which already starts ringing a bell with those of you who are more akin and aware of the transboundary surface water law. The second substantive is that there's a duty not to cause significant harm. I would then say that countries do not enjoy an absolute sovereignty over their transboundary aquifer, although especially in the breakout sessions, we can have a juicy discussion about this. And then there's an obligation to cooperate, which leads to the development of joint cooperation mechanisms. These are the substantive. Very quickly, the procedural ones: obligation to monitor and exchange information, obligation to provide timely notification and undertake an EIA, an environmental impact assessment, where there is a likelihood of a significant adverse effect, which is different from significant harm. And if there is a significant adverse effect, obligation to consult and negotiations. So it's complex. There's a lot there. Next slide, please. The question is, are any of what I just said emerging as customary international law? In my opinion, having reviewed the 3 and all the, not too many, but all the agreements and arrangements that are out there, the obligation to monitor, the obligation to exchange information, and to a lesser extent, the obligation to provide timely notification and developing institutional arrangements is emerging as customary international law. And it is important to say that, because if it is customary international law, then it will be applicable to every single member of the international community. That means every single state, whether or not they are party to the United Nations Watercourses Convention, whether or not they are party to any of these agreements. So that's the practical relevance of identifying something as customary international law. Next slide. So in the chat, there was already some numbers thrown around: 592, 336. The numbers are important and are big, and I'll finish in the next 30 seconds. The important thing is to realize that still we really have a handful of agreements / arrangements out there that actually focus on transboundary aquifers. Although I'm fully aware that a lot of transboundary surface water agreements also include in one way or another some part of aquifers. The 3 that I can highlight here, and then Pilar will focus more on the Guarani, are probably the oldest one, the Genovese Aquifer Convention, which is obviously based in Europe. One that is not a treaty, it's very much a soft agreement, a soft arrangement, the Ocotopeca-Citalá between Honduras and El Salvador. And in Africa, an MOU between a number of countries on the Unimedian-Taudanitensis grouped aquifer system, which is not yet in force. I don't have more time, but I'll be happy in the breakout sessions and in the Q&A to expand on any of these points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesco. So I now give the floor to Professor Pilar Carolina Villar. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation, Otto, and for letting me participate. I'm very honored to be part of this section. In the case of South America, there are 30 transboundary aquifers, including Guarani. And before talking the legal and institutional aspects of the Guarani aquifer, I would like to introduce this aquifer, which spawns from Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. As you can see, Brazil holds most of the area and is the main user of the water. And the realization of the Guarani Aquifer System project provide a considerable amount of data, which is not the reality of the other aquifers in the region. And with this data, it was possible to conclude that first, there are not transboundary conflicts. Cases of overexploitation or contamination are very few and localized. Potential transboundary conflicts would be limited to the borders areas, and groundwater problems have a local nature. So the hotspots for cooperation, international cooperation, would be the frontier recharge areas, especially in the region of Pedro Juan Caballero, Ponta Porã in Paraguay and Brazil, and Rivera and Santana do Livramento, Uruguay, Brazil, the red squares in the map. Also, there is potential for conflict in the orange square in the department of Itapúa in Paraguay, due to the potential interconnection between the aquifer and the transboundary river, which would be Paraná River. And in the confined zone, the greatest risk is in the yellow square, Concordia and Salto, Argentina and Uruguay, due to the intense use of groundwater for thermal tourism. Could you pass me the next slide, please? The agreement on Guarani Aquifer was signed in August 2, 2010, and represent a milestone to the establishment of aquifer agreements, because it's the only one in the region that also it was the first one written under the auspice of the draft articles. Besides, it came just after the end of the Guarani Aquifer project, and there was no conflicts for the groundwater in the area. So it was a case of preventing a hydrodiplomacy. On this table, I'll summarize the main characters of this agreement. The preamble mentions some soft law international instruments like the UN resolutions, including the draft articles, or UN environmental declarations, as well as some regional treaties like La Plata Basin Treaty and Mercosur Environmental Agreement. The scope of the agreements focus on transboundary water resource. So the geological formation, it's not mentioned, it's not part of the agreement. Second, it has incorporated the main principles of international law, such as the obligation of not cause significant harm, equitable and reasonable utilization, cooperation and sovereignty. I don't agree with the criticisms over the emphasis on sovereignty. It's true, it's put lots of emphasis, sovereignty appears in the text a lot, but it was limited by the principles of norms of international law, like the obligation of not causing significant harm and the equitable and reasonable utilizations. The main procedural rules of international law were included, for example, the exchange technical information or the obligation to inform exchange data or plenary measures that may have transboundary effects. And on institutional level, countries choose to create a commission to the Guarani Aquifer, which would be responsible for coordinating cooperation. However, this commission hasn't been created yet, so it is unclear its role in cooperation and how it will be structured or what powers it will have. Has a dispute settlement mechanism. The agreement mentions direct negotiations and an arbitral procedure, which will have to be defined. So there isn't a solid dispute settlement system to address possible future conflicts. And on November 26, 2020, the agreement finally entered into force, which is a very important step. However, the ratification process took more than 10 years. And Brazil, with the agreement's depositary, still has not made the agreement's publication by a decree, and countries did not establish the commission. The approval by the Global Environmental Facility of the execution of a new international project to the Guarani might encourage the Guarani states to implement the agreement and establish the commission, but the beginning of this project is also facing some delays. The most urgent action is the creation of the commission. Without it, there is a great risk that the cooperation process continues in a stagnation mode. Unfortunately, COVID and its economic effects on the region, as well the national context of Brazil, don't help very much. And next slide, please. Otto, next slide. Otto, okay. So that is what I have to say in 5 minutes. I hope I kept the time. Here's my email if anyone wants to contact me. And remember, life happens over aquifer, even thought we can see, or even thought they are transboundary or not transboundary. They are here before defining frontiers. So that's it. Thanks for your attention.
Yeah, thanks very much, Pilar, for this excellent presentation. And now to conclude the panel, I give the floor to the magnificent James Saramba to introduce us to the Southern African Development Community Groundwater Framework. So it's my great pleasure and privilege to now give the floor to James.
Thank you, Otto, for the opportunity to present the role of governance in transboundary aquifers in the SADC region. The SADC region is 16 member states in Southern Africa, of course, and the mere existence of SADC GMI is a mechanism to promote the governance of transboundary groundwater. Next slide, please. So within the SADC region, we've got instruments that facilitate the governance of groundwater and its definition within the instruments. So we've got a water policy of 2005, a water strategy. We also have a revised protocol on shared water courses of 2000, which has been amended a couple of times to accommodate some of the changes that have been going on since then. And we also have regional strategic action plans that roll in 5-yearly terms. So we are currently on the 2021-2025 regional strategic action plan that has got groundwater well entrenched in its mechanisms. And that's how the regional instruments filter to the national frameworks for the groundwater governance. Next slide, please. So the protocol on shared water courses also has incorporated some mechanisms from the draft articles on the law of transboundary aquifers. On the left there, we've got 5 items that have been identified already, which include the equitable and reasonable utilization of shared water resources, the obligation not to cause significant harm, the general obligation to cooperate in good faith, obligation to conclude basin aquifer specific treaties and so forth, as well as the regular exchange of data and information. This is already incorporated in our instruments. However, missing from there at the moment is public participation and the gender equity in the management of shared aquifers. We have also observed as yet that the draft articles do not necessarily translate into a law, but they provide a framework for cooperation. And there's also need to adapt them to accommodate the needs of the region in terms of governance of transboundary aquifers. Next slide, please. So our theory of change, which also transcends into our regional strategic action plans that roll every 5 years. They look at the utilization of knowledge to build capacity, which goes into the planning and development of groundwater resources, going through the institutions, information and investments to support the sustainable socio-economic development, especially of the poor communities, to be able to utilize the resource for their own development. So this is the matrix kind of that we utilize to build at the institutions, the information and investments in the 3 I's framework to promote the socio-economic development of our communities within the region and regional integration as well. Next slide, please. So within the SADC region, one of the very important aspects which has seen SADC GMI being established in 2008, but operational since 2016, is to have a permanent structure that drives the governance of groundwater across the borders. Because as you know, transboundary aquifers cut across more than one sovereign state. I recall this is a statement that has been mentioned already in this webinar. And by hovering across more than one state, a regional institution like SADC GMI is able to convene the member states to manage the transboundary aquifer. So this is the how it runs from the academic and research institutions, private sector, public project implementing entities, the different member states convened through SADC, the SADC structures, government ministries, and it also even goes all the way up to the groundwater committee of the AMCAO to try and have a holistic view and attention to the cross-cutting issues. As we know, droughts cut across more than one state, so do groundwater dependent ecosystems. They know no boundaries. And these institutions are such that they look at all these things, and then the governance of the resource is enhanced in the process. Within 5 minutes, this is what I can give at the moment. Of course, we have an opportunity to delve deeper in some of the issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. And thank you to all three speakers for keeping so well to the time. That's amazing. Thanks. That's really very much appreciated. And that also gives us considerable time for some Q&A. I actually wanted to do this in 2 rounds. And I'm going to ask questions that actually I did not come up with myself, but that I took from the questions submitted by the participants as they registered, so in advance. That will be round 1. And then in round 2, I will want you to reflect a bit further on one of the poly questions. So those are questions that are submitted as we speak. So let me just first ask a question to Francesco, and then I will ask a question to Pilar and then to James. So I would kindly ask all of you to try to limit your answer to a couple of minutes, and so that we have enough time for the other questions. So first to Francesco, one of the questions that was submitted in advance was, how can we manage a transboundary aquifer in a sustainable way? So what does sustainability mean in the context of groundwater management and regulation? You have the floor.
Thank you, Otto. So I will give 2 answers depending on what we define by sustainability. First, if by sustainability we mean in particular for non-rechargeable fossil aquifers, those who are not connected in a significant way or at all with surface water, if we consider sustainability there, the possibility to use the water in a fossil aquifer for as much time as possible, then sustainability means something very specific. And I think there, as happens in, for example, transboundary aquifers in Northern Africa or in the Arabian Peninsula, where most aquifers, if not all, are fossil aquifers, one just has to be very careful, because making it very simple, if you pump all the water, there will not be any water left. So then from a legal perspective, what does that mean? That means that the obligation to prevention, the precautionary principle, if you want, would need to be considered in a much stronger way. If sustainability is used in a more, if you want, Brundtland kind of perspective with the 3 sectors, social, economic, environmental, then I would go back to the factors that are provided for in international water law and international law to determine what is an equitable and reasonable utilization of a transboundary aquifer. Let's not go into all these factors, but you can find them both in the Watercourses Convention and in the draft articles. And they're often, especially non-lawyers, will ask, okay, just tell me, what does equitable and reasonable utilization mean? And there you really end up in trouble, because you start the answer by saying, look, I'm sorry, I am a lawyer, but the answer is I cannot tell you. And it's not because I want to be picky, it's because there is no such thing as one answer that applies to every single equitable and reasonable utilization scenario, but every scenario will be different. So if you're asking me what does sustainability mean for transboundary aquifer, that would be a context-specific analysis based on the factors provided for through international water law that are framed both in the Watercourses Convention and in the draft articles. Last, very, very briefly, the one thing that I do think would make the utilization of a transboundary aquifer unsustainable, whatever way you want to determine unsustainability, is if people were to understand the reference to sovereignty as I can do whatever I want with my share of the aquifer. And I think, as Pilar mentioned, while some people have interpreted like that, I, like Pilar, disagree with that. And I do think that any country that were to even suggest something like that would be in big trouble from an international law perspective, which for a domestic lawyer would be very little, but still it would be breaching international law. Thank you very much.
Thanks. That was an excellent answer, I believe. Maybe the person that actually submitted this question can join you in your breakout group and then discuss further. That's just a suggestion of mine. So we now move to the question that was submitted and that I have assigned to Pilar. How is the Garani Aquifer Agreement being implemented by the contracting parties, especially concerning data exchange? And of course, we just heard from Pilar that the agreement only entered into force in November of 2020. So maybe there's not all that much to say about its past, but then I invite Pilar to also reflect a bit on the future, focusing again on data exchange. So you have the floor, Pilar.
Thanks, Otto. Thanks for the question. Well, as I told you, the agreement has just came into force, and we don't have still the publicity of it because Brazil didn't dictate the decree saying that the treaty is into force. We don't have any case in the formal international water law about the data exchange, but we have some paradiplomatic initiatives which are arranged by the hotspot areas, especially the one in Concordia and Salto, that they monitor the level of the aquifer. But it's not something mediated by international authorities, it's something mediated by the local authorities, because there the aquifer is a fossil aquifer. Guarani has a particularity that is not a homogeneous structure. You have recharge areas, you have fossil, which are renewable waters, but you have also areas that are fossil. So there you have some monitoring going on. And also in Santana do Livramento and Rivera, you have some monitoring due to the problem of contamination. We are talking to an area of high vulnerability because it's the recharge area that has a great population living there and some problems in the sanitation. So the risk of contamination, it's great. So they are monitoring. But again, it is not, how can I say, mediated by international law. How I see the future of the Guarani Aquifer agreements. I think I also gave an idea of that in my presentation, but I am not really optimistic for the short time, at least because in Brazil, which is the main user, we don't edict the decree. Environmental issues are not in our agenda in this moment, are just the contrary. We are just destroying our environmental agenda. The COVID scenario puts lots of restrictions in all the aquifer countries. which are trying to control the COVID cases, and they have really, really economical issues. So for the short time, I don't see a good perspective. Maybe if it really comes, this new project of Jeff, that would be like an injection of, how can I say, hope to make the countries do something. But to be positive, Guarani Aquifer don't have conflicts on it. So, and it is on most of the region naturally protected. So for this moment, we don't have a great, how can I say, problem not implementing this cooperation agreement, but it is still there. It is an example of cooperation agreement to groundwater in a scenario that we have really, really few agreements. So that is what I have to say, unfortunately, not a very enthusiastic, how can I say, lines about it.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much. Well, we have to be honest, right? That was very helpful. Of course, I'm also thinking of some waters that are being shared here in my region. I'm thinking of the Mekong, and it's always interesting to make comparisons. Okay, and then to James, I have this question that was submitted to us. Is there an ideal mechanism to manage a transboundary aquifer in particularly dry areas, so in desert context? I think you already referred to it in your presentation, but maybe you can expand a little bit on this if you like.
Okay, thank you, Otto. So let me start by saying that I would not give an ideal answer. And I also do not think that we have an ideal mechanism, because a lot of these things are context-based, depending on where it is and what are the parameters around it. We also have transboundary aquifers that are, especially in our region, most of them that are known are falling within a river basin area, and their management has got some linkage with the river basin organizations, or what you call water courses. However, it also presents its own challenges in scenarios where the transboundary aquifer does not fall within the water course in the sense of the conjunctive existence or the coexistence of surface and groundwater. Traditionally, the management of river basin organizations, or what you call water courses, has been predominantly surface water. And we are in a phase where we are trying to integrate the management of surface water and groundwater and ensure that the governance thereof makes some logical sense in terms of the science around it. However, there's a general understanding that we have in the region that if we have to manage a shared water resource, we have to start by creating an understanding between the riparian states that are sharing that transboundary aquifer, that they need to jointly manage that resource. And that is something that I believe our region has been quite advanced, because we have an institution that hovers above the two sovereign states, and it can then utilize this convening mandate, given the credibility that is given by the Treaty of SADC, to convene the members of sharing the transboundary aquifer and putting it into context. So what does that do? It leads to the opportunity for the member states sharing to collect data, to conduct joint studies to understand better what is this transboundary aquifer about in terms of its physical as well as its scientific characteristics. That will then generate some data. I mean, some data which is used to create information that the 2 or 3 member states sharing the aquifer can utilize to jointly plan. So that's kind of a sequence similar to the Jeff methodology for generating transboundary diagnostic analysis reports, and then joint strategic action plans that would then lead them to manage this sort of transboundary aquifer as one unit. So I wouldn't say this is peculiar to dry areas alone. I think that is generally the principle that can be applied for governance of such shared resources in the groundwater sector. Maybe I can end there for now, and we can further divulge and discuss this topic in the subsequent stages. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, James. So we have only a couple of minutes left. So I wanted to ask just one of the poll questions, and I will just ask all three of you to reflect very briefly on it. So one of the poll questions was about the difference in the legal regulation of surface water and groundwater. So what's the main difference between the legal regulation at the international level of surface water and groundwater? And I think already from the three presentations, we can sort of draw the lesson that the main difference seems to be in the approach to sustainability and to sovereignty. So those seem to be the two big and controversial concepts, sustainability and sovereignty. I mean, Francesco already predicted that we would have a juicy discussion on sovereignty, and Pilar looked at international law as a limitation to sovereignty. So I would kindly invite all three of you to very briefly reflect on this issue. And I wanted to do it in the reverse order, if that's okay. So James, could you go first?
Thank you, Otto. In my view, I think one of the challenges we have, the difference we have with groundwater and surface water is the water courses are relatively easy to define. But as we are now, we have serious issues in recharge zones, pollution points, and so forth, which we have very little information on at the moment. Some of the groundwater we are using now probably is being recharged in a very different area that we don't know. And that is something that science still has to unpack for us and ensure that we have clarity in terms of recharge, discharge, and so forth zones. Maybe just a quick one on that. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. So Pilar, what is the difference between surface and groundwater regulation in your part of the world?
I think that point that James mentioned is crucial. When you're talking with surface waters, it's very limited. You can say, okay, it's the watershed, but in the end, it's the limitation of the course. But when we're talking about aquifers, you have many water bases in the hydrogeological basin. We're talking about another territoriality. And also, you cannot say that you have a transboundary aquifer without if you don't have cooperation to delimit the flux of these waters. So I think that the importance of cooperation in groundwater is unquestionable. Without cooperation, you cannot define the limits of the aquifer, and you cannot define if it is a transboundary aquifer or if it's not a transboundary aquifer. So I would add this to the speech of James.
Yeah, thanks so much. A lot to reflect on further. So Francesco, anything to add, please?
Very briefly, polls are incredibly useful to start so-called juicy discussions. They're a bit like referendums, a yes or no. Having said that, they can also be very divisive, and they can be incredibly misleading. So the problem with that sort of question is that, again, it's not because I'm a lawyer, it's not a yes or no answer. So when you ask, what's the difference between surface water regulation law, whatever, and groundwater or aquifer law, it's a question of emphasis more than huge differences. So a bit like, again, following the lead of James and Pilar, the emphasis, for example, for me is, although you also have it in surface water law, is a lot on monitoring, is a lot on actually understanding what in the earth is down there, because it's much more difficult when it comes to groundwater and transboundary aquifer. The rest, it really depends also on the context and the region and so forth. I don't think the differences are so much as some would like to think. And also, just to anticipate, while I myself said it's a juicy discussion, the sovereignty, when you actually go down to the ground, to the practical relevance, it's very much an academic discourse, in my opinion. So when you go to the actual hydrologists, the ones on the ground, the decision makers, the water managers, if there is cooperation ingrained in them, like Pilar said, there will be a way around it. So just wanted to raise that.
Thanks very much. And thanks to all three panelists for being so succinct and to the point. And that means we're exactly on schedule. And I now give the floor to Yumiko to tell us about the breakout groups.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Otto and Dave, for excellent chair and the three great speakers. Very, very inspired. And I know you have so many more questions to ask. So now we'll move into the breakout session where you can actually ask your question directly to the speakers, chairs, or anyone that you want to ask questions to. So yes, we are going to have 4 rooms. The group 1, I will explain from the group 1 first. Group 1 will be Francesco Sindico and David Duvlovny will be there. And then group 2 will be Pilar, Carolina, and Otto Spikers. Group 3 will be James Arumba and Barbara Janus Paoletta. Barbara is actually also part of this group of organizing these events. And she is also the GWP technical committee member helping us for this event. And group 4 is Patricia Wouters, who is actually the director of the Wuhan International Water Law Academy, and myself. So group 4 is actually for people who have any questions really more in general about, you know, the Wuhan International Water Law Academy or International Water Law or about the Mooc. The rest of the groups are, you know, you have heard the speakers, so specific topics you can go and ask. And then if you are more interested in socializing with the other people who are in this webinar, I mean, in this interactive session, please stay in this main room. And my colleague Tobias Isabel will be there with you with some nice music. And then you can actually have a social interactions. So then you can remain in this main room. The way to choose the breakout is if you go down to the panel, on the bottom of your screen, you see this mark called Breakout Rooms. Now, if you click there, I think the tech host will be opening the breakout in a minute. You will be able to choose your breakout rooms. Now, I don't see it right now, but I think Mario is, James, could you please open the breakout rooms? So then you can, welcome back everyone. I hope you had a great discussion. And I know, I'm sure in every group, the time was not enough. So I would like to hear back from each panelist, just some final words reflecting on what you have heard from the group discussion and also from the other speakers and so on. Perhaps starting from Francesco, you can just give a minute. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, no, we had a great discussion. Dave was a fantastic moderator, chair. So thanks to him for bringing everybody together. There were so many questions. I don't really know where to start. I think one of the points that I would like to highlight was that there were a lot of technical questions as well, hydrogeological, which I think highlights something that is very important, which is when we talk about transboundary aquifers and international law, there needs to be ever-growing communication between lawyers and non-lawyers. And we both have different languages to some extent. I speak customary international lawyerish, and other people speak rechargish, you know, and both of them are complicated languages, but we need to find a way to talk to each other and to communicate in a way that we both understand. and especially when it comes to the ground, to the practice. So we were discussing the possibility of, say, two countries actually identifying an aquifer and there being political will and effective governance on the two sides, and what to do then. And I think, again, we did discuss, rather than focusing too much on the flaws or the beauties of the draft articles and all the puzzle that I mentioned, on actually highlighting to those policymakers in a room that there is something out there for them to start talking. There's a guidance out there. Let's be honest, at the end of the day, it's going to be those policymakers from those two countries or more to decide how to go ahead. It's not for a third country. It's not for an academic sitting, well, not in an office anymore, in their bedroom somewhere, dictating or telling them what to do. But it is important to highlight that there is something out there, that there's a puzzle. Puzzles are complicated, but puzzles can be put together if there is a will to do that. I think those were the points I take from our discussion. I'm sure there were more, and if Dave is around, I'm sure he can fine-tune my comments.
Thank you so much, Francesco. A great summary and the key takeaways, I think, from your comments and the group discussions. Yeah, let's move to Pilar. If you could just give some final words.
Well, in the group, we emphasize a little bit on the question of sovereignty and the importance of sovereignty. I think that we are very afraid about sovereignty, but the last line of Francesco, in the end, are the states that make the agreements. So it's an expression of sovereignty. And when we're talking with transboundary aquifers, we cannot forget that aquifers are a mix of water and territory. The geological formation basically is the territory of states. So of course, states, we want to assure their sovereignty, especially here in South America, where we have a tradition of not wanting to make general agreements or fulfill general agreements in water. None of the countries in South America are part of these international water conventions. But they have lots of treaties signed on that matter. So we choose to make bilateral or multilateral agreements in the applicable to a specific basis. So in each base, we arrange our personal cooperation process, and we include these international obligations. So in the end, sovereignty for me is a discussion that just makes us a part of the main point, that is cooperation, and focus in highlight the importance of cooperation and data exchange, because without data exchange and monitoring, we don't have transboundary aquifers. We don't have an idea of how these transboundary aquifers function, because in the case of Guarani, even though it's a huge aquifer and the geological formation is formed by it's shared by 4 countries, the transboundary issues there that we would have international law applicable, it's very restricted to the border area. So this big giant, in the end, for transboundary issues is focused in the border areas. So the border areas are, you have transboundary issues. The other parts, you don't have these transboundary issues. So cooperation for me and for the group is the main issue. And also not only cooperation to make agreements, but cooperation to help these countries to promote management, which is not easy, especially for developing countries. It's costly to do this management, and also cooperation to educate people and professionals about the importance of groundwater, because they have to understand groundwater, to see groundwater, to create a political desire to make agreements or implement the agreements that are going on, like is the case of Guarani Aquifer. That is it. that we want to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pilar, for that takeaway. Now I would like to ask James to give a brief takeaway for your reflections. In 1 minute.
Thank you very much. So from our end, we discussed quite a few issues. One very important issue was the question of how do we manage to have all these instruments as a region that facilitate the transboundary governance of water resources. And one of the answers I gave was the political will that exists in our region, coming out of the treaty that is signed by all the 16 SADC member states, formally since 1992. It is about regional integration. It is about regional cooperation. And so these instruments, this treaty has actually provided a very fertile ground for cooperation in many other sectors. And therefore, groundwater and water, of course, is benefiting from this platform. So that was one of the questions that was discussed in our group. And then the other issue that was also discussed is the issue of the inequalities or the different ambitions of the riparian states sharing. In this case, it was not only a transboundary aquifer, but a water resource, which could be surface water, and how we are managing that specific challenge, which some of the partners are very strong. So the discussion came to look at issues of river basin organizations, which is probably a coincidence. In most of our transboundary aquifers, they fall within river basin organizations. And these river basin organizations are benefiting from the mandate that was given to the SADC GMI, our institute, to integrate groundwater into the river basin organizations, which had traditionally been institutions only running surface water. So this is a very important role that we play. We are not trying to manage groundwater as an isolated resource, but to assist the existing institutions to integrate groundwater in the governance of water resources at large within their areas of jurisdiction. So this was discussed. And what this means is also investments coming into the river basin organizations are actually managed by the river basin organizations themselves. So the member states or the riparian states sign a cooperation agreement in the form of an RBO agreement, which also enables each member state to fund the secretariat of that RBO. And when they do big projects, they go out to source funding for those type of projects. So that's the mechanism that normally works. Of course, it's work in progress, but it is actually happening at the moment. The other discussion also looked at the issue of data sharing and capacity. We have programs as SADC GMI that try to build the capacity of all the riparian states and all the member states in the region to build their capacity for data collection and management, of course, culminating in the generation of information for the management. If we can say it, one of the weakest links in our work as groundwater practitioners or groundwater experts is the absence of information. I think we are very strong at running models that we have had so many PhDs on running models, but we are not providing information that the politician needs to cut a ribbon and supply water to the people that do not have water. And I think that's the direction that we should take. And that's what we, SADC GMI, are supposed to be doing to support our region and to support the decision makers to cut a ribbon and supply water to those that need it and promote socio-economic development of the poor in our communities. So thank you very much. I think those are the last words from my end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. We can hear like really the nature of the groundwater. It's so complex. It's even more complex than the surface water, and that's already complex enough to really deal with the transboundary water. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's very exciting. just like to also give a floor quickly to Patricia Wouters,
Yes,
Director of the Wuhan International Water Academy, just to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Yumiko. Thank you to the excellent speakers and the great session. We had a very active panel, and I'd like to highlight we had questions from China, from Pakistan, from South Africa, from Turkey. The questions ranged from, what is the definition of a transboundary aquifer? Someone asked about the Salalah, what's happening with the Salalah case before the International Court of Justice. GWP South Africa asked how we might use the Mooc teachings to better help the region. And I did say that all of the 6 sessions will be available online on our website in Wuhan and also GWP. We had a question or an update about the Indus Treaty, why it's working, how it's working. And we had some very difficult questions on climate change, which complicates everything. So really a very active session, never enough time. I'd like to thank everyone who had questions in our session, and I look forward to our continuation. Thank you, Yumiko, and thank you, panelists.
Thank you so much, Pat. And finally, how was the social group, Tobias and Isabella?
Yeah, thank you. So instead of engaging in a very heated debate, as you apparently all did, we really just enjoyed some nice music and relaxed a little bit. But we also shared some events that are coming up or that are currently going on that are interesting for, I think, everybody here. So, for example, there's a UNESCO course currently going on on the governance of transboundary aquifers, and also a call for papers by the Chinese Journal of Environmental Law. And also there's a virtual coffee chat coming up where you can meet women in the water sector discussing water on a global scale. So Isabella will post the links also to the chat, but that was basically everything. So we had just had a nice time, 20 minutes, and relaxed a little bit. And yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you very much for that. I'm happy to hear that everyone enjoyed each groups. So I would just like to ask you to take a few moments. We will be closing very shortly, but just if you could stay on and then let us know a bit of a feedback from today's session. So if James could please pull up the poll if everyone can go back to the pollif.com/GWP. There are 4 questions we would like you to answer in this survey. And if you would open that, there are 4 questions. What have you learned from today's session? This is an open question, so please answer this. And then the second question we have is, would you like to engage with other learners and participants beyond this event or the Mooc? Yes or no? We are hearing from people like there's an interest for more peer-to-peer engagement. We want to know what are the levels, what are the needs on that, and then what kind of engagement would be more beneficial for you. There's a choice answer. You can actually move around these answers, so you can see James is now showing how you can do. You want to know the job opportunities, you want to exchange, and you want to network, knowledge sharing, showcasing the case studies. And then you can confirm the ranking. And after that, you can just put any other suggestions. So if you didn't find any of your choices that you want to exchange for, you can also type it here. You can also make any other comments on the Mooc over here or the session. So, and then don't forget to click submit the survey after you finish. So that's the survey. I hope that we will keep this survey open now. So please do type in to everyone so we can all hear the feedback. And I would like to then give a bit of updated news about the Mooc. And if James can share that, the Maria can share this presentation. So on the Mooc, yes. So I think most of you are already part of this Mooc, but it's still open. Please do sign up for the Mooc. We have a wide range of modules related to transboundary freshwater security. And from the today's speaker, actually, we have James and Francesco talking in this module on international water law. So you can hear more about that as well. And the big news is that we are extending, if you can click, yes, we have actually extended this Mooc to next year, because initially we were supposed to close the Mooc by August this year, but we decided due to a high demand to keep extending it for one more year. So if you are signed up, you can stay and continue to enjoy it for another year. If you haven't signed up, you still have more than a year to enjoy it. And for those who actually signed up and for the certificate, that period will be extended. So you have a little bit more time to complete your certificate. And next slide, please. And then the international water, this interactive session on international water law current series, and today is the final one. But we are actually discussing on the next series. And after we have a summer break now. Here we'll take a break in July, August. But after that, in autumn, we are hoping to continue this transboundary freshwater security governance training to continue. So please stay tuned. We will be informing you by emails, and for those of you who participate, you will be receiving some updates by email and also through the Mooc platform. So please stay tuned. So with that, thank you so much for today. I would very much like to thank all the panelists and the co-chairs, Dave and Otto. It's been wonderful working with you, and everyone who participated today, and all the people behind the scene. And I think this has been a fantastic series of live events that we had together. And before we closing, I would like to invite you to open the camera to take a group photo together. And we will be actually using the group photo for or a website on some of the materials. So yes, feel free to open the camera only if you are okay to be on our site. Otherwise, it's okay. You can stay black. But we would like to see you. It's very nice to see the faces. Thank you so much. So if we can maybe just wave to each other as we take the photos.
Yeah, and Yumiko, before you go, I'd like to say a few words of thanks, please, after the photo.
Okay.
Please. Okay.
So Mario, did you finish taking the photos? Let us know when it's done.
Yes, Yumiko, thanks.
Excellent. Thank you.
We're getting better.
Yes, Patricia.
Yumiko, if I could please, I have a lot of people to thank. First, I'd like to thank Yumiko for the inspiration for thinking of the Mooc, and then for reaching out to see if we could do international water law. Yumiko and GW team, you guys have been fantastic, out of this world, so much fun to deal with over this past 7 or 8 months. I've loved it all. Thank you very much for professionalism, getting everything right, keeping us honest, and just, delivering on every level. It's been fantastic. Next, I'd like to thank our fearless leaders in international water law, Professor Alistair Rue Clark and Barbara Paulada Jeanette, who started the international water law module and really provided the inspiration and guidance. And it was Ali who said to us, remember Yumiko, he said, we need more international water law. When I go to the field, we still have problems, so let's do international water law. And I said, yes, Ali and Barbara, let's do it. So Ali and Barbara, thanks for your leadership and for supporting us. I would like to thank the International Water Law Academy team, especially for my counterpart, Professor Kong-Ling Ji in Wuhan. It was really his idea, who said, let's see what we can do with GWP. Let's try to have a series of international water law live events. And we did that. Thanks to Professor Otto, who's in Wuhan, and Dave, also a founding member of the Academy, and all of the affiliates. We have affiliates all around the world, each of whom stepped up when I said, will you do some speaking for us? Come on, we'll just be 5 slides. And everybody said yes. So thank you to the team. I really would like to extend a sincere thank you to all of the participants, most notably the global speakers we have had in all of the 6 series. You guys have been amazing. I have learned so much. I've been taking notes. I've got the wonderful PPT, and how you could succinctly present your expertise in 5 slides or less and then participate so wholeheartedly. Thank you very much, speakers. You have really outdone yourselves and contributed so very much, including the lovely speakers today. Mostly, I'd like to thank the participants. Oh my gosh, we've met so many people. We've had a couple of hundred people register for each event. It kept going up, right, Yumiko? We started from the hundreds and then the 150s and the 170s and the 200s, and now we're 250 and about 100 people showing up. And what I love with the breakout group, so we got to meet and greet everybody. I mean, I've made so many new friends from around the world. So participants, you have been excellent. You've had a record uptake, and I look forward to seeing you in the next series. And so looking forward, Yumiko, it's only going to get better. Thank you very much. You can count on the International Water Law Academy and all of our team to keep supporting GWP in this MOOC. To everybody who's here today, spread the good word and have a wonderful summer, and we look forward to seeing you in the fall. Thank you, Yumiko. Thank you, GWP. Thank you, speakers.
Thank you very much, Pat, in this wonderful concluding note, and also vote of thank you. And I would like to thank you very much, Patrice. I think your energy and you coming up with all the ideas and creativity, I think it has really pushed us to really have this great series of events. So thank you so much. And very much looking forward to working with you. And I would like to thank Wuhan International Water Law Academy as well for this great collaboration.
Pleasure.
Yes, and again, thank you very much to all the speakers today, Francesco, Pilar, James, and the chairs, Otto and Dave, and all the tech committee, I mean, so to say, the team behind the scene.
Excellent.
And of course, Pat and Barbara for supporting this group discussions as well, and all of you for joining us. So please stay tuned. As I said, we'll be back after the summer, and we'll get back to you on the details. With that note, thank you so much to everyone, and enjoy your rest of the day and the week.
Thank you.
See you next
Bye-bye.
time.
Thank you. See you soon.
Bye.